Sparta was an agricultural nation. And because it is ideal for agriculture, it needs people to work the land. And through its conquest, Sparta developed a slave system. Okay? And these people are called helots. And helots are just slaves in Sparta that work the land. They're farmers. And these are people who have been conquered by Sparta. And because there are so many helots, okay, the ratio is about 10 to 1. So for every one helot, for every one Spartan, there's 10 helots. Sparta had to become a military society in order to control the helots. So it created an education system in order to train its citizens to be soldiers. So the system worked like this. About age 7, you left your family and you were put into a boarding school where you're watched over by kids who are older than you, okay, maybe 11 or 12. And obviously, if you put young kids with older kids, the older kids will beat the crap out of these young kids who are about 7 or 8. And this instills the idea of emotional discipline into the children. Now, when these children became teenagers, they were paired with a mentor who was maybe 25 to about 30, okay, an older adult, and they became lovers. The Spartans did not consider this homosexuality. We would consider it homosexuality, but they themselves did not consider this homosexuality, okay? They just considered this as a way to build emotional cohesion, love among its soldiers. And about age 18 or 19, the students would graduate and they would go on to marry and have their own families. But the Spartan soldiers were all required to eat together, okay? So the soldiers, even though they had families, they were still required to train together and to eat together. Sparta had no private property. Everything, including the helots, belonged to everyone, okay? So it's basically like communism or proto-communism. They had no money system. They had no wealth. Everything belonged to everyone. And it was a brutal state, okay? The Spartans were notorious for being brutal people. So an example is the helots. So they had a campaign of terror to maintain control over the helots. So young soldiers would often be required to patrol at night. Okay, they would maybe line the fields because now and then some helots would break curfew. They would at midnight try to sneak out and have some fun. And if you, as a Spartan young man, saw a helot be out at night, well, they would kill you. They would take out a knife and stab you in the neck. Okay, and this was meant to instill terror in the helots to prevent them from rebelling. Okay, but the problem is because there were so many helots and the Spartans were so brutal, rebellions and revolutions would break out often. Okay? So this created a society which focused on maintaining control in the Peloponnese. So the Spartans were not at all interested in foreign policy. Okay? They had absolutely no interest in the world outside Sparta. The Spartans were as a culture was very conservative. Okay? They liked the way that they wanted things to stay the way they are, okay? So it was a very conformist culture. Now and then you had some kings or individuals who tried to change society, and the Spartans would kill those people, okay? You were not allowed to question authority. You were not allowed to promote change in Sparta. The Spartans were also isolationists, okay? Their entire policy was, if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, okay? And so that was the society of Sparta. If you think about it, in many ways, it's very much like China throughout its history. Okay? So the analogy is China, which China has always been, throughout its history, very conservative and very isolationist. China is just not interested in the outside world. Why? Because it's focused on maintaining control over its peasantry. Okay? There's too much internal chaos. China just is not interested in the outside world. So China, for its history, has both been conservative, does not like change, okay? And very isolationist. Is not concerned about the outside world. Does that make sense, guys? Any questions so far about Sparta before I move on to Athens? Okay, so Athens was a completely opposite society to Sparta. And the reason why, again, is geography. This is Sparta. Sorry, this is Athens. And Athens is in Attica, and it's by the coast. And Athens, the countryside is very hilly, so it's bad for growing crops. But Athens has two major advantages. The first major advantage is it has a very good harbor. Okay? And also, it's hilly, but the hilly terrain is actually good for growing olive trees. Okay? Olives. It's also very good at pottery. So because of this, Athens, for most of its history, focused on trade, right? It was a trading nation. And because they are traders and merchants, they have a very different culture to the Spartans, okay? So the first thing is they're very expansionist, okay? They're aggressive. And the idea here is the Athenians will go and seek out new markets. They also plant new colonies throughout the Aegean. This is to the west is the Aegean Sea. To the south is the Mediterranean, okay? And they will plant colonies throughout this area. And they have to encourage their citizens to go out and explore the world in order to find new markets, in order to bring goods and ideas back to Athens, okay? Because Athens was expansionist, its cultural system, its cultural beliefs was very different from the Spartans, okay? So whereas the Spartans were very conservative, the Athenians had a policy, had a belief in the idea of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. So eudaimonia is a Greek word, and it means human flourishing. Flourishing. And the idea here is to be the best that you can be, all right? So the example of eudaimonia, the most famous example of eudaimonia is this. In Homer's Iliad, the main character is Achilles. And Achilles is the best warrior of the Greeks against Troy. And Achilles says this in the book. He says, before I came to Troy, I saw a prophet. I saw a fortune teller, and he told me my fortune. He said I could choose to not come to Troy and live a very long, healthy life. But I'd be a nobody. If I came to Troy, I would die young, but I would die as a hero. I would be remembered by everyone. Everyone would sing of my glory and my triumph. So that was my choice. I could live for a very long time and just be a nobody, or I could be a hero and die young. And he said, well, for me, that's not a choice. Okay? For me, to be alive means to achieve eudaimonia. I have to be the best I can be, and therefore, my only option is to come to Troy and die a hero. Okay? And that's the mentality in Athens. It is much better to die young as a hero than to live a long time as a nobody. Whereas the Spartans were the complete opposite, okay? It's just better to be a nobody and get along with everyone than it is to die as a hero. Okay, so very opposite societies. And what this did, this idea of eudaimonia, it made Athens into a very competitive society. Okay, because if everyone's trying to achieve eudaimonia, then you're going to have a lot of competition. Okay, because they're going to be one hero. Everyone cannot be a hero. They're going to be one hero. So again, the example is Homer's Iliad, and when Achilles got into a fight with Agamemnon, okay, Achilles basically says, I don't like you, you're a dog, I'm not going to fight for you. And Agamemnon says, I don't need you. What Achilles did was he went to his mother, who was a goddess, and Achilles said to Thetis, his mother, could you please get the gods to help the Trojans so that Agamemnon would have to come beg for my help against the Trojans, okay? He was basically committing treason. And in the Greek world, you're allowed to do that because the most important thing is eudaimonia, to achieve eudaimonia. Okay, does that make sense? It's a very weird world